Here at St. Peter, if you're new this weekend, we are in the last part of a series looking at the 7 letters of Revelation. And what that means is in the first few chapters of the book of Revelation, there are 7 different letters that Jesus dictated to John to write down and then to hand or deliver, you would say, to each of these 7 churches. This map shows the probable route that the letter carrier would have taken. First to Ephesus, that's number 1 on the map, located closest to Patmos, where John was writing this down. And then up towards Pergamum, and then back down a valley towards where we are today in Philadelphia. Some of these ancient cities only exist now as ruins, kind of out in the countryside. Ephesus would be an example of that. Others lie underneath modern cities, and that's the case with Philadelphia today. The modern city of Al-Shahir is a large city of 100,000 people or so, but it's spread out over a fairly large area, about 375 square miles. So much larger by land than Arlington Heights. And what's notable about Philadelphia and modern-day Al-Shahir in particular is it's an area that's especially prone to earthquakes. And so, for example, in the year 17, less than a century before John's writing, the entire city was leveled by a major earthquake, and they had to rebuild on top of it. And so ancient Philadelphia, by and large, is located underneath the modern city. This right here shows some of the ruins you could still see there if you were to go to Al-Shahir today. But these are from a later church dedicated to St. John, 3 of which pillars still remain standing to this day. Hold on to that, because we'll come back to that theme a little later on in our text. So here's how the letter begins. Revelation chapter 3, starting at verse 7, says this: "Write this letter to the angel of the church in Philadelphia. This is the message from the one who is holy and true, the one who has the key of David. What he opens, no one can close, and what he closes, no one can open." If you remember, if you've been with us the last few weeks, in each of the 7 letters, most often, when Jesus introduces himself, he chooses a facet, a detail of the description that came in chapter 1 to unpack for that particular church, with one exception, this one. Instead of going back to chapter 1 in Revelation, instead, Jesus chooses to quote, almost word for word, an obscure prophecy from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22 says this: "I will give him the key to the house of David, the highest position in the royal court. When he opens doors, no one will be able to close them. When he closes doors, no one will be able to open them." Now, this prophecy was written about a very specific person who was the chief of staff, you might say, or would become the chief of staff for the king in that time. But he was given this title and this authority and this power in replacement for another one who was about to be deposed. So just prior to this word of prophecy in Isaiah chapter 22, that individual is given this message. God told Isaiah, confront Shebna, the palace administrator, and give him this message: "Who do you think you are? And what are you doing here, building a beautiful tomb for yourself, a monument high up in the rock?" Now, what's interesting is if you go to the British Museum, you can see this rock inscription that experts believe was the exact same tomb that Shebna built for himself prematurely, as it turns out. The inscription in ancient Hebrew says this: "This is blank, the royal steward. There is no silver or gold here, only blank, and the bones of his maidservant with him. Cursed be the man who opens this, presumably, tomb." Notably, what's literally broken out of the rock is the name of the individual that would have been buried in that tomb. Most likely because that individual, probably Shebna, was considered disgraced and cursed by God. And so no one wanted to remember him anymore. And why would that have happened? Not just because he built a tomb for himself and tried to promote his posterity, but because of what happened before then. Chapter 7, verse 17 says this, "For the Lord is about to hurl you away, mighty man. He's going to grab you, crumple you into a ball, and toss you into a distant and barren land. And there you will die, and your glorious chariots will be broken and useless. You are a disgrace to your master." Some pretty harsh words of judgment against this Shebna guy. Now, what's the context? Barreling down towards Jerusalem and Judea is the mighty Assyrian army. This depiction is from Assyria, it's also in the British Museum, of that army after it had conquered the northern tribes of Israel and was about to surround Jerusalem and lay siege to that city. Shebna was the right-hand man to King Hezekiah at that time. King Hezekiah was a good king among a long line of not-so-good kings who sought to remain faithful to God, but his right-hand man Shebna, fearing this mighty Assyrian army, convinced him to try to buy them off. And in order to do so, the way that happened was they stripped all of the gold off the doors to the temple, all of the gold and silver from the inside of the temple, and gave it to the Assyrian king, hoping that would help preserve their lives. Instead, the army marched on, surrounded the city of Jerusalem, and sought to lay waste to King Hezekiah and the temple and all who were there. And so as a result of his unfaithfulness, of his lack of trust in God, Shebna was deposed. And after he was deposed, and the army gathered around to seek to destroy Jerusalem, here's the message from the Assyrians to Hezekiah and all who were in the city. Listen, this is the message from the great king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you. He will never be able to rescue you. Don't let him fool you into trusting the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely rescue us. This city will never fall into the hands of the Assyrian king. Have the gods of any other nations ever saved their people from the king of Assyria? What God of any nation has ever been able to save its people from my power? So what makes you think that the Lord can rescue Jerusalem from me? Some pretty strong words from the king of Assyria. He thought that he was greater than any other power in the world and that the God of Israel couldn't stand against him. Not only was this a direct attack on Hezekiah the king and the city of Jerusalem, but on their God as well. And in the face of that, Shebna failed. And who was to take his place? Well, back to Isaiah chapter 22. We'll see that the keys to the house of David were given instead to Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, to replace you. We're told, I will dress him in your royal robes and give him your title and your authority, and he'll be a father to the people of Jerusalem and Judea. So this Eliakim, given the keys to the house of David, we're told was faithful to God, gave wise counsel to King Hezekiah, and immediately after that threat from the Assyrian army was given, what happened that very night was God sent his angel into the encampment of the Assyrians, and in one night destroyed 185,000 soldiers. Their army and their military might broken, the king fled back to his own country where he was killed by his own countrymen, thus ending the threat against God's people and Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem. Where do they need to put their trust? Not in their military might, not in their gold and silver, but in the God who was caring for them the entire time. What is the point of this? Why does this obscure prophecy and this Eliakim, who doesn't show up ever again in the Bible, in fact, his name means something, God will establish, and two other ancestors of Jesus apparently were named after him in his honor, but only now, at the very last book of the Bible, does this obscure prophecy come up. And what is the point? Jesus is saying, this Eliakim, who some of you will remember, well, I am Eliakim, but even greater. For I have the keys to the house of David. In fact, I am David's son and David's Lord. And in the same way that God took care of them, I am here to tell you, I will take care of you. So, the one who has the keys to the house of David, the one who is in control of all history, the rising up and the tearing down of nations, what does he have to say to this church in Philadelphia? That's what comes next. He says, I know all the things you do, and I have opened a door for you that no one can close. Now, in the New Testament time, that language of a door is very significant. Here's one example. Upon arriving in Antioch, they called the church together and reported everything God had done through them and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles too. Jesus himself says in John's Gospel, I am the door. You enter into a new relationship with God through me. He says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The door of faith is access to a new relationship with God himself. And what Jesus tells the church in Philadelphia and us today is that he alone opens that door and no one can close it. He has opened a way for you to a new and right relationship with God, and no one can take that away from you. But there's one other way that this idea is used in the New Testament. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. In the meantime, I'll be staying here at Ephesus until the festival of Pentecost. For there is a wide open door for a great work there, although many may oppose me. He says something similar in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and Colossians chapter 4. This image of a door not only has access for us to God, but also is the opportunity God gives us to bring good news to those who are far from Jesus. He opens the door for ministry and for the message of God to reach the ends of the earth. For this church in Philadelphia and for us today, there are two promises then. He will open the way for us to a new relationship with God, and we will never be shut out from a life-saving relationship with him. But he will also open up opportunities for us to bring good news to those who are close to us and far from Jesus. Now, the church in Philadelphia had one problem when it thought about that. Jesus says, you have little strength. Maybe they were few in number. Maybe their success on the external side wasn't all that significant. They didn't think that they were a mighty church. But notice what Jesus affirms. He says, yet you obeyed my word and did not deny me. As he looks at this little church in Philadelphia, and he says, I have an open door of opportunity for you to bring good news to your city and to the world. He says, what I'm looking for isn't external success, but instead faithfulness to my word and to me. In chapter 3, verse 9, he goes on to say, this is some of the opposition you will face. Look, he says, I'll force those who belong to Satan's synagogue, some harsh words, in fact, those liars who say they are Jews but are not, to come and bow down at your feet. From the earlier letters in Revelation, we know that the kind of persecution they face would be mocking and ridicule in the public square, or even outright attack, where they'll come to physically seek to hurt them or cast them into prison. That's what others in other cities that Jesus calls the synagogue of Satan had done. But what is his promise? They will acknowledge in the end that you are the ones I love. Jesus says, I look to a man's heart and discern whether or not there is true and abiding faith. People may say that they are faithful to me, but I can see through to your motives and your actions. And I have declared that I love you, he says, to the church in Philadelphia. And why? Well, verse 10 says this, because you have obeyed or kept my commandment to endure. And as a result, I will protect or keep you from the great time of testing that will come. Now, what is that commandment to endure? Again, if we go back to chapters 1 and 2, we'll see this theme being developed. John introduces himself as a partner to the patient endurance to which Jesus calls us. And to the church in Ephesus and Pergamum, he highlights that as one of their redeeming qualities, your hard work and patient endurance, your love, faith, service, and patient endurance. And then again, like we saw last week, he builds upon it again and again and again throughout Revelation. It's more cyclical than linear, Pastor Randy reminded us. So in chapter 13, it's spelled out more clearly. This command to endure means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. And then repeated almost verbatim in chapter 14, but expanding what it means to be faithful. He says, obeying his commands and maintaining their faith in Jesus. So again and again and again, what is Jesus' message to them and to us today? Hold fast. Cling to my word in season and out of season, regardless of what is said about you or to you. Build your foundation on my word, and you will stand until the end. And so what's his promise to those who are faithful? He says, I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one can take away your crown. What is that crown? Paul says it similarly in 2 Timothy. He says, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now this prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of his return. Paul, here in 2 Timothy, Jesus, in his message to the church in Philadelphia, says, on the last day, when he does return, whenever that day comes, the righteousness of Christ will be your reward, and it will be never taken away from you. It'll be like the crown given to the victors in the Olympic Games that will signal that you belong to Jesus and your eternity with him is secure. Finally, verse 12. All who are victorious, who receive that crown that can never be taken away, you'll become pillars in the temple of my God, and they'll never have to leave it. You remember I said in Philadelphia it was especially subject to earthquakes? In fact, some historians suggest that every single day that whole area would have had some kind of tremor, and earthquakes were not uncommon, with the result that in the first century, when they built the city, nobody actually lived in the city because it might come tumbling down when the next earthquake came. And so they lived outside of the city in small huts, in shacks, and caves that were more secure. So what does Jesus promise? He says, when you dwell with me, you're like pillars in the temple of my God that cannot be shaken. And you don't have to run to the hills for your lives because you will dwell with me. You'll never have to leave my presence, for I will have made all things new. And as eternally secure pillars in that temple dwelling with God, he has one more promise to give. He says, I'll write on them the name of my God. When you have God's name on you, that means your identity with him is secure. In baptism, you're given that name of God, and it can never be taken away. And the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from heaven from my God. That means you have access to the very presence of God, like having a passport, a golden ticket that can take you anywhere in the world. God says, you will have free access to my presence for forever. And finally, I write on them my new name. Jesus says later on in the book of Revelation, that new name written on him is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The resurrected Jesus says, you also receive as your eternal inheritance my resurrection life. And that too can never be taken away. So what is the call to the church in Philadelphia and to us today? Remain rooted in his word, in season and out of season. Build your life on it, for it is the only sure foundation. And what is the reward? It's an eternity that will never tarnish or fade, that will stand secure for all time. Amen. A little later on during upper room time, we'll put these back up. Sorry, I just turned off my remote. These are our here in practice questions. What is the hardest thing that you have had to endure in life? You notice that maybe as a theme today. And then number 2, how does all that Jesus promises, whether in our text today or in Scripture in general, how does that encourage you to hold on, to endure, regardless of your life circumstances?